Oh, I know, because they got nothing, they have any medication up in the bathroom.
Well, they have medication that can slow it down a little bit.
No,
They have,
no.
no.
But you can view with some of the symptoms, like anxiety and stuff like that. I think we put a lot of class in it. Only thing they have is they know the root has an anxiety and exercise. Treat your brain like you treat your heart. That's what they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's begin. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for the chance to be together. And realize, Lord, that this world gets us all, some sooner, some later, all in different ways. But one way or another, Lord, we lose strength and we pass. And so we ask, Lord, that you'd be with us, that you would give us wisdom in the time that we have, and help us to number our days and use them well. So give us your spirit as we study your word, and help us, Lord, to grow from it. So hear our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, now we got to get through this chapter today. So enough Gilgamesh. We gotta go all the way through. Janice says good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm going to start reading at the beginning. We'll get past where we got through last week, and we're going to make our way all the way to the end of the chapter. All right, here we go. The word of the Lord came to me, chapter 16, book of Ezekiel. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, confront Jerusalem with her detestable practices and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says to Jerusalem. Your ancestry and birth were the land of the Canaanites. Your father was an Amorite, your mother a Hittite. On the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to make you clean, nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in cloths. No one looked on you with pity or had compassion enough to do any of these things for you. Rather, you were thrown into the open field, for on the day you were born, you were despised. Then I passed by and saw you kicking about in your blood. And as you lay there in your blood, I said to you, live. I made you grow like a plant of the field. You grew and developed and entered puberty. Your breasts had formed and your hair had grown, yet you were stark naked. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. I bathed you with water and washed the blood from you and put ointments on you. I clothed you with embroidered dress and put sandals of fine leather on you. I dressed you in fine linen and clothed you with costly garments. I adorned you with jewelry. I put bracelets on your arms and a necklace around your neck. And I put a ring on your nose, earrings on your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were of fine linen and costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was honey, olive oil, and finest flour. You were very beautiful and rose to be a queen, and your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because the splendor I had given you made your beauty perfect, declares the sovereign Lord. But you trusted in your beauty and used your fame to become a prostitute. You lavished your favors on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. You took some of your garments to make gaudy high places where you carried on your prostitution. You went to him, and he promised, and he possessed your beauty. You also took the fine jewelry I gave you, the jewelry made by my gold and my silver, and you made yourself male idols and engaged in prostitution with them. And you took your embroidered cloths to put on them, and you offered my oil and incense before them. Also the food I provided you, the flour, olive oil, and honey I gave you to eat, you offered as fragrant incense before them. This is what happened, declared the sovereign Lord. And you took your sons and daughters, who you bore to me, and sacrificed them as food to the idols. Was your prostitution not enough? You slaughtered my children and sacrificed them to idols. In all your detestable practices and your prostitution, you did not remember the days of your youth, when you were naked and bare, kicking about in your own blood. Woe, woe to you, declares the sovereign Lord. In addition to all the other wickedness, you built a mound for yourself and made a lofty shrine on every public place. At every street corner you built your lofty shrines and degraded your beauty, spreading your legs with increased promiscuity to anyone who passed by. You engaged in prostitution with the Egyptians, your neighbors with large genitals, and aroused my anger with your increasing promiscuity. So I stretched out my hand against you and reduced your territory. I gave you over to the greed of your enemies, the daughters of the Philistines, who were shocked by your lewd conduct. You engaged in prostitution with the Assyrians too, because you were insatiable, and even after that you were still not satisfied. Then you increased your promiscuity to include Babylonia, a land of merchants, but even with this you were not satisfied. I am filled with fury against you, declares the sovereign Lord, when you do all these things acting like a brazen prostitute. When you built your mounds on every street corner and made your lofty shrines in every public square. You were unlike a prostitute because you scorned payment. See, now he's changing the metaphor. You adulterous wife, you prefer strangers to your own husband. All prostitutes receive gifts, but you give gifts to all your lovers, bribing them to come to you from everywhere for your illicit favors. So in your prostitution, you are the opposite of others. No one runs after you for your favors. You are the very opposite, for you give payment, and none is given to you. Therefore, you prostitute, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Because you poured out your lust and exposed your naked body and your promiscuity to your lovers, and because of all your detestable idols, and because you gave them your lovers' blood, your children's blood, therefore I am going to gather all your lovers with whom you found pleasure, those you loved as well as those you hated. I will gather them against you from all around and strip you in front of them, and they will see you stark naked. I will sentence you to the punishment of women who commit adultery and who shed blood. I will bring on you the blood vengeance of my wrath and jealous anger. Then I will deliver you into the hands of your lovers, and they will tear down your mounds and destroy your lofty shrines. They will strip you of your clothes and take your fine jewelry and see you stark naked. They will bring a mob against you, who will stone you and hack you to pieces with their swords. They will burn down your houses and inflict punishment on you in the sight of many women. I will put a stop to your prostitution, and you will no longer pay your lovers. Then my wrath against you will subside, and my jealous anger will turn away from you. I will be calm and no longer angry. Because you did not remember the days of your youth, but enraged me with all these things, I will surely bring down on your head what you have done, declares the sovereign Lord. Did you not add lewdness to all your other detestable practices? Everyone who quotes Proverbs will quote this proverb about you. Like mother, like daughter. You are a true daughter of your mother, who despised her husband and her children. You are a true sister of your sisters, who despised their husbands and their children. Your mother was a Hittite and your father an Amorite. Your oldest sister was Samaria, who lived in the north of you with her daughters, and your younger sister, who lived to the south of you with her daughters, was Sodom. You not only followed their ways and copied their detestable practices, but in all your ways you surely became more depraved than they. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, your sister Sodom and her daughters never did what you did, you and your daughters have done. Now this is the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them as you have seen. Samaria did not commit half the sins you did. You have done more detestable things than they, and have made your sisters seem righteous by all these things you have done. Bear your disgrace, for you have furnished some justification for your sisters, because your sins were more vile than theirs. They appeared more righteous than you, so they were ashamed. So then be ashamed and bear your disgrace, for you have made your sisters appear righteous. However, I will restore the fortunes of Sodom and her sisters, and of Samaria and her daughters, and your fortunes along with them, so that you may bear your disgrace and be ashamed of all you have done in giving them comfort. And your sisters, Sodom and her daughters, and Samaria with her daughters, will return to what they were before, and you and your daughters will return to what you were before. You would not even mention your sister Sodom in the day of your pride, because your wickedness was uncovered. Even so, you are now scorned by the daughters of Edom, and all her neighbors and the daughters of the Philistines, all of those around you who despised you. You will bear the consequences of your lewdness and your detestable practices, declares the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will deal with you as you deserve, because you have despised my oath by breaking the covenant. Yet I will remember the covenant I made with you in the days of your youth, and I will establish an everlasting covenant with you. Then you will remember your ways and be ashamed when you receive your sisters, both those who are older than you and those who are younger. I will give them to you as daughters, but not on the basis of my covenant with you. So I will establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Then, when I make atonement for you and all you have done, you will remember and be ashamed, and never again open your mouth because of your humiliation, declares the sovereign Lord. Woo! 63 verses. And not easy ones.
In record time.
In record time. Even on the last 2 weeks, we only got through about a third of it. But I think it's important to set the stage and set the table if you want to understand the whole picture. So, impressions, thoughts?
Wow, a question, and I came late. Why is it all about your daughters? Why isn't it about your fathers or the male? Why is it all the daughters and the women and
I think it's because of the social roles, the social gender roles of that time. You'll notice that. Well, okay. Let's pause here and ask a question. So if you work this allegory, you've got the women and the daughters. Who are they in this story?
Samaria and Sodom.
Sodom, Samaria, Jerusalem. Who are the men in this story? The Lord. Now, the story in this analogy keeps talking about prostitution. You obviously don't have prostitution alone. So this is the side of prostitution. Who are they sleeping with?
all the other nations around them?
Well, the other gods, the idols, and then the nations, the empires. Now this is interesting, because what's then the relationship between the gods and the empires?
Well, hand in hand.
Why?
Because the empires look to their gods for their power, and they praise the gods for what they have.
If you look on, for example, how many of you ever have heard back to Near Eastern history, the Code of Hammurabi?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know where we discovered the Code of Hammurabi?
Oh, man. What is today, Iraq?
Okay, do you know what it was on?
Babylon, yes.
Because you go to a British museum, you can see, because a lot of the stuff in the colonial period got taken to, Europe. Britain has a bunch of it. Now this got very controversial, for a long time, because you stole our artifacts. But it's kind of a good thing some of these things were in Britain and not in Iraq, because of course when Iraq, they'd be gone. But the Code of Hammurabi is on a stele. It's on a big stone, and you've got all this writing down below. But on the top you have an image. And it's the image of the god handing the code to the emperor. Now, how does this relate to the Bible?
God, 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai.
That's right. This is the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. If you go into the New Testament, you'll hear the Apostle Paul talk about principalities and powers. Now, what's he talking about? Well, we battle not against flesh and blood, Ephesians 6, but against principalities and powers.
Devil powers.
Yeah.
Well, so
The gods.
well, exactly. We're talking about see the New Testament and the Bible has. See, we like to draw fine lines, and we say, okay, here's material and here's the spiritual. Okay, we can understand that distinction. But when Paul's talking about principalities and powers in the heavenlies, he's talking about what we would use in our terminology, spiritual forces that govern the earth. Now, again, in our materialist, modern, so you've got theists over here that will say, oh yeah, I embrace that language, and atheists over here, or materialists over here that say, oh, I don't like that language. But let me ask a question that is currently in the news. So there's right now, every day is a new revelation of some powerful man and how he has harassed or abused or molested someone, right? And just this morning in the New York Times, there are a bunch of articles this week and now going back to the Clinton days. And so now there's the partisan food fight. Who started this? Was it the Democrats or the Republicans?
Try day one.
And so, but then you'll often read also in the newspapers, well, maybe this is a good thing because now that all of this is coming out, maybe we'll get beyond this. I personally have very little confidence any of this will go away. Why?
Man and woman are sinful.
Okay. Man and woman are sinful. So I was reading, I was in the checkout line last night. I was in the grocery store in a checkout line, and I was reading Ross Duthot. He's a New York Times columnist. He's a Roman Catholic, one of the conservative columnists at the Times. And he was basically, the point of his opinion piece was Ken Starr was right. Bill Clinton should have stepped down. Okay? And so I'm kind of scrolling through this in the checkout line, reading the article, and right in the middle of it is a very provocative, sexually provocative advertisement. And it's like, we sit here and we ask ourselves, and we congratulate ourselves, oh, now with Harvey Weinstein and Al Franken and, let's be fair to both sides, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and JFK and, all around, yet we say, oh, we'll get beyond this. And I'm thinking, how?
It's beyond us already.
That's right. That's exactly the point of all of this. It's beyond us. That there are the systems that are among us. They're above us. And this language of powers and principalities, of idols and empires, they're basically saying sin is something, sin is something beyond us. Neil Plantinga, a number of years ago, wrote a great little book, Not the Way It Should Be, a breviary of sin. And the whole book is a little book that talks about sin. And one of the things he talks about is, in the Bible, sin, we are both sin's victims and the perpetrators of sin. And we are both responsible for sin and often powerless before sin. And this is within which we live. And this language gets into this. And so when you ask, why all the women on one side? Well, you have to pause and say, well, who's on the other side? And so you see, I mean, the Assyrians and the Babylonians get mentioned in this column, but they do so as empires. And Jerusalem and Samaria and Sodom get mentioned in this column. They do so as women, and partly because in this scheme, Jerusalem and Samaria and Sodom sometimes play over here, and sometimes play over here. And that's where it gets into the daughter metaphor. Because if you read the Old Testament closely, we've been in the book of Kings at 11 o'clock, and if you read how leaders of groups talk to one another, there's always and again, we have this today just as much. We don't like to own it, but there's always this conversation of status. And so if one leader of one kingdom comes to another and defers to the other and says, "my father," to the other, well, no one in the room thinks one is the biological father of the other. What does father mean? Yeah, head. Authority, status, power, deference. So when you talk about mothers and daughters here, well, and that's right from the beginning. Your father was an Amorite and your mother was a Hittite. This is who you've been. Now, so that's kind of the framework that this whole thing follows. And and here's the funny thing about prostitution. Now and again, and this stuff is really subtle. If you sleep for a man for one night for a few $100s, we call it prostitution. If you marry a millionaire who maybe you don't like so much, especially if he's an old man, what are you doing?
You're a gold digger.
We have a different word for that. And so, and now with, in our society, men for a long time, actually we just watched a movie last night, my wife and I, and it was about basically, it was like Groundhog Day where a guy had to live the same day over and over and over again. But the woman he was marrying was of high status. She was a doctor, her father owned a successful business, and the man who was marrying her was a funny, irresponsible, not yet grown up substitute school teacher. And so the whole, the whole gimmick of the show was he had to keep going through the same day over and over and over again until he learned his lessons so he could arrive and be worthy of her at her status. But now, when you look at marriage and romance and beauty and all of these things, there have always been status conversations in this. And what's amazing about this chapter is that this chapter acknowledges and engages in these things. You gave your beauty to another. I mean, let's use the most obvious example in our nation right now. Does Donald Trump look like Brad Pitt?
No.
How does he manage to always have models as lovers and brides?
Because his money looks like Brad Pitt. Just put a dot over his face.
That's right. And so all of these things are in play. Now it's interesting in this, because of course this extended analogy, maybe it's an allegory, it's a parable. You have all these various elements in it. And it's interesting in the one scene, she uses her wealth that she got from the Lord. Jerusalem uses her wealth that she got from the Lord to attract other lovers. Some of whom you like and some of whom you don't. And again, I mean, when you look at, this is the grist of movie making. You know, you all know the story of the beautiful girl who, you know, likes this guy, but doesn't want this guy. Because this guy maybe has looks and status and money, but this guy has a good heart. And he really loves her for who she is. But, you know, I mean, this is, we don't stop telling these stories. And what's amazing is that when we tell these stories, we fully recognize all of the dynamics that many of whom we continue to share with this ancient story. And so it's interesting in this story when the Lord then takes Jerusalem, and this whole section is this one, strips her naked before her lovers. What's that about?
Shaming and showing power.
Yeah. Showing power, shaming her. In a sense saying, you wanna do prostitution? Well, let's take away everything I've given you and see how you look then. And then I'll turn you over to these people. Okay, well now we get into the question of, well, so she's chasing, you know, all these other empires. Well, how are they going to treat you? What do Assyria and Babylon want from Jerusalem? What do these men want from this woman? I mean, the whole sexual harassment conversation we're having now, well, what do these powerful men want from these women? And so on one hand, you could say, well, prostitution and marriage, well, they're kind of the same thing. But on the other hand, you say prostitution and marriage are wholly different things. How are they different? What happens in a marriage? Commitment. Commitment to what?
Faithfulness.
Faithfulness. Until when?
Yeah.
Now,
Or divorce, or.
well, but I mean, it's interesting, you know, as transactional as sex has become in our culture. So the movie that I watched, you know, last night, again, the whole thing around this movie revolved around, basically he had to learn all of this. It was like his wedding day that he had to live over and over and over again until he actually was able to achieve the wedding and be married. Now, there's something deep in that statement. This is a completely secular movie, okay? But there's something deep that our culture has not lost there. Because when you marry and you say, till death do you do us part, well, you know, we're a little shallow in our culture, but, you know, we began today talking about the age of decay and how we break down. Well, what does that mean? What are you signing on to when you marry someone? The age of decay. You're looking across the table and saying, well, right now we're all young and hot and beautiful, but if we stay together 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, there's going to be, you know, there's going to be diapers and bedpans and crutches and hospital beds and nursing homes and strokes and Alzheimer's and, you know.
It's hard though when you're young, unless you're a really mature person, it's hard to imagine that. It's hard to believe in that. Because you're feeling so good about yourself at that point, you can't see it changing.
That's right. And this is where principalities and powers, so you've got the spiritual realm, you've got institutionals, because institutions in some ways, what are institutions for? And in some ways, marriage is an institution. It also has a spiritual quality, doesn't it? That's why we get married in church and we say vows before the Lord. It's in this realm that is above us. Now, here's the thing, that ideally, institutions help us to do more than we're able to do. So that young couple, obviously, just as you said, they don't know anything. They cannot appreciate what they are saying or doing in that moment, can they? They have no idea, most of them, what this will cost them. Ideally, what the institution helps them do is, in a sense, grow up and become, the kind of people we all become admirable people. Because when we see someone who, and we see it, when we see it in this church, when we see someone who cares for their disabled spouse, year after year, and people look at them and think, boy, I bet you he or she isn't getting a lot out of this marriage these days, but they are faithful. Why do we esteem that faithful person? Yeah, why do we esteem that?
It's really hard. And so much in our culture doesn't do that today.
Right. Go ahead.
I think it's spiritual.
Yes, isn't it though? Somehow we know that the person who is sacrificially, faithfully keeping their vows and getting nothing out of it, we look around them and say, I can see something of God there. Now look at the Christian story. Look at Christianity. What's at the center of our story? What is this a symbol of?
Pain.
Pain.
Suffering.
Suffering. Sacrifice. Sacrifice that the whole world looks at as pointless.
Love.
That's right. It's love. And so then you see, it's so funny because I'm watching this movie last night, and they're making, they're going to do their own vows, and so that, at least at one of the early iterations of this day, the bride's giving her vows, and I'm listening to this vow thinking, it's not a vow. She's just saying a lot of flowery, nice words. And it's interesting, a little later in the movie, when kind of the immature man makes his vow. Now, again, you look at, get back to that. The immature man makes his vow. He kind of parodies her vow because it's just this, self-important, flowery speech. Why are self-important, flowery speeches not vows?
No commitment.
Right. What does a vow mean?
I promise you.
That's right. I am binding myself. Look at the story of Abraham and the cut animals and the vision. He has to walk me through it. I am binding myself to something above myself that is not in my shallow self-interest. Now, it may be in a deeper self-interest that I want to grow up and become, an esteemable person who suffers for the other. And again, it gets into the definition of love. And so, in the process here, again, the story here is that the man makes a commitment to her. That's in the story, right? And she violates the commitment. And I've been listening to the psychologist, and he uses a lot of Jungian language. Carl Jung was an interesting guy, but some of the language that they use there are archetypes. And this is kind of here's the thing, with all of the issues our culture has about Christianity, we look around for other words so that we can avoid using Christian language that offends people who are slightly anti-Christian. An archetype is a word like that. And archetypes are stark, they're kind of like principalities and powers, they're kind of over here. They're stark examples of ideas that we naturally share. And so this entire story is an archetype. Because you have the man who is the Lord, who sees the despised and rejected infant, which is valueless. And so again, in that cultural framework, this discarded infant in the dirt, kicking in her own blood, is an archetype of valuelessness. You can't have an image you don't get a picture in humanity of anything that feels more lost than that. Because here is a human being, which in our system is at the top of the hierarchy in terms of the creation, which is treated like garbage, which is at the bottom.
And is totally powerless.
And is totally powerless. And so the Lord comes and says, live. And then the Lord takes this creature and doesn't, again, you're dealing with the ancient world. In the ancient world, the assumption would be a powerful man would look at the value of, let's say, a teenage girl and figure out how to extract the value out of her. And that would either be for his own pleasure or for a monetary reward in prostitution. But he doesn't do that. What does he do?
He clothes her and feeds her.
He clothes her, feeds her, washes her, but doesn't just, again, it's an archetype, doesn't just give her, okay, we're going to go to Target and get you some sweatpants and a t-shirt. What does he do for her? Treats her like a queen. Gives her jewelry and the best food and the best clothing and treats her like a queen, and then he makes a covenant with her. He puts his garment over her. What does that mean?
Commitment.
Okay, again, this is another archetype. She goes from the bottom to the absolute top, and he doesn't use her. He makes a commitment to her. And so now the whole middle long section of this that we dragged through is all the question about that commitment. Because the question is, okay, he made a commitment to her. What has she done to his commitment? Because it was a covenant, so she was treated like a person. I mean, she wasn't just an object here. She had a part to play, and what did she do with her part to play?
She broke the covenant.
She broke the covenant. Now again, this is an archetype. So, did she just violate it a little bit?
No, all the way.
All the way. And the story goes into exhausting detail. All the ways she broke it. But now there's still tension in the story. What's the tension?
What's he going to do?
What's he going to do? Now, you're going to say something, Lil?
He's got a stripper of everything.
That's right. So now you've got the question. Again, we're dealing with archetypes here. So you've got the covenant that has been violated. But now there's what one philosopher would call cross pressures in the scenario. What are the cross pressures now? What does justice demand? Payment. So he strips her and he gives her over. That's justice. But there's a second cross pressure to the covenant, isn't there? What is it?
But didn't he say in this there's gonna be some atonement?
Promise. So on one hand, the covenant demands justice. On the other hand, the covenant doesn't let justice be all that there is to it. Because go ahead.
A question. Does Jerusalem involve herself in part of the covenant by accepting all that stuff? Is that her?
Yes,
That's her part of the covenant.
that's right.
Because she accepts it.
That's right. That's right. She's not a child. She's an adult.
Mm-hmm.
You do see there's different kinds of covenants. The parent-child, what is the parent-child covenant?
I would think
One way.
It's one way. And ideally, that covenant morphs and becomes two-way. But initially, especially, the parent-child covenant is one way. So how does the story start?
One way.
Okay, so the story begins
The baby.
with a covenant broken, right? The parents of this girl, the Hittite and the Amorite, were unfaithful to their covenant, and they despised her and left her to die. Then God, in a sense, has a one-way covenant. Live. Then the one-way covenant becomes a two-way covenant. I will be faithful to you. You should be faithful to me. And she accepts the riches and the wealth. And then she violates her side of the covenant. But there still remains in this covenant. See, here's the thing. When you stand up and take marriage vows, do you say, I will be faithful to you unless you break it? Do you ever hear unless in the vow section? Why not?
The covenant.
Well,
A total commitment on both parts.
that's right. It's a total commitment on both parts. Now, do the vows get broken?
Yes.
Yeah, all the time. In big ways and small. In fact, to love and to cherish, in richer and poorer, in sickness and health, till death do us part. That's the Book of Common Prayer vows. You know, they get broken. These vows don't survive the first year. In big ways and small. Okay. But none of this says unless and until. Which means that the one-way covenant endures. And so then the question about the Lord and his covenant is, how faithful will he be? So on one hand, he has to be faithful to justice. But on the other hand, then the question is, well, here's the real question. So let's say, the king, the emperor here, he knows his wife is a harlot, and she does what she wants, and he just says, how do we look at the situation then?
What's wrong with him?
Two ways, let her go, or I keep her regardless.
Well, here's the tension in that, and it has everything to do with his attitude. Because part of the if he says, she can do what she wants, what does that say about his covenant, his character, and his love?
He's not keeping his end of the covenant either.
Right. Because if he says, if on one hand he says, I can't stop her, what does that imply?
That's what I keep trying.
Well, I want to keep her anyway. If he says, she's just a slut, what does that say?
No commitment.
Doesn't care.
Doesn't care. And so here's the challenge that he has. Can he both, justice is required, but can he still hold to the promise? Can he be faithful when she is unfaithful? And that, now how do we regard someone, how do we differentiate someone who is dismissive from someone who is faithful even when others are unfaithful? Committed. Able to love. You know, and again, all of these tensions, and we know all these tensions. It's difficult for us to talk about them, especially apart from stories. But again, when you look at archetypes, the cross. This is exactly the story around it, right? That God is faithful both to justice and to redemption and atonement, even when we are not.
Those last verses, he addresses both of them.
That's right.
In verse 58, you will bear the consequence of your lewdness and your detestable practices, declares the Lord. And then a couple verses later, yes, I will remember the covenant I made with you.
That's right. And so you hear this all the time, again and again in the Old Testament. On one hand, you deserve justice for what you've done. On the other hand, I will be faithful still. And then there's the hope of restitution. And the hope of restitution comes all the way at the end. And it says, I will establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's exactly what it means. Because here's, in Spanish, we have 2 words for know. There's saber and conocer. Now, 2 plus 2 equals 4. What kind of knowledge is that? Common, factual, it's kind of out there. I know you. What kind of knowledge is that? Personal. Emotional. Relational. So in Spanish, you have 2 words to distinguish these two. And that's kind of a good thing, because they're 2 very different ways of knowing. And so the whole point of this is, in the midst of this whole story, now let's say the king made his covenant to the woman, and she was a faithful wife. Well, that's a wonderful story. And that's, in a sense, the story we were all looking for. What do we know about the king because she was unfaithful? What we know about the king now is something more. Not only, see, if she's faithful, do we really know that the king is committed to justice? Well, we think so. But we don't know it because we haven't seen it acted out. Do we really know that the king is committed to loving an unworthy person? A person who violates the covenant, a person who fails. Do we really know the king is committed to redemption?
Time after time after time.
Now we know it because we've seen it. Before it was just potential when the marriage was good. Now it's actual because everyone in the kingdom's been talking. And the reputation of the king, so, look, we have a public demonstration about what we do in terms of reputation. What do we think of Bill Clinton? Well, it's complicated, right?
Very.
Very. And so so now we're reevaluating the Clinton years. And so here we got a lot of stuff on tape and on film and in newspapers, so people are hauling up the feminists who now are lighting their hair on fire about Roy Moore, who in the New York Times wrote, well, that was a personal thing, and we should keep the politics over here because Bill Clinton favors these policies that we believe are pro-women. He should get a pass. Gloria Steinem. So, okay. So when the wife is unfaithful, what do you think everyone in the empire is saying? What is the court of public opinion debating in that moment? That's right. He should get rid of her. He should get rid of her. She's not worthy to be our queen. And so not only is he dealing with the stuff with her, he's dealing with his reputation. But he hangs in there. And so, again, Plato, I was mentioning this, so Plato in Plato's Republic, he debates what is righteousness and what is unrighteousness. And Plato basically says the righteous person has a reputation for unrighteousness. Well, why would that be? Because you suffer if your righteousness is in secret and you have a public reputation for unrighteousness, you suffer injustice for the sake of your righteousness. It's an incredibly insightful observation. And then you look at what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Don't commit your acts of righteousness in public. Why? Because you've already received its reward. Commit your acts of righteousness in secret. And your Father in heaven who sees will know. So the king is righteous. The wife is unrighteous. Everyone believes the king is unrighteous for not doing justice. But again, here in the story, he both does justice and accomplishes atonement. Then you will know that I am a Lord. So I will establish my covenant with you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Then when I make atonement for you, for all you have done, you will remember and be ashamed and never again open your mouth about your humiliation. What does that mean? Now let's imagine that the wife had been unfaithful. The queen was unfaithful. He didn't divorce her. He kept her around. But every time there was conflict between them, he reminded her of her unfaithfulness. Would we esteem that move?
No, I understand.
No, but we might understand.
He doesn't truly forgive.
That's right. In other words, what does the Psalm 103 say? As far as the east is from the west, so far will I remove your transgression from you. So what real atonement looks like is he does justice, but he also holds true. And she is restored. She comes back to the throne, and he treats her as if she had never done anything. In her mind, she knows. And what does that do for her? Makes her feel complete. Helps her know she's completely loved. That her love isn't about what her beauty gives to him. That's transactional. That's what she did with the others. That she is loved because he knows exactly who she is. And he loves her still. And his love actually makes her a better person.
And enables her to keep her part of the covenant.
That's right. His love helps her stay faithful. Because if, let's say, another daughter comes around and the daughter says, hey, the king over there, he's looking at you, what do you think? And at this point, the queen could say, let me tell you, I took that road. Let me tell you where that road goes. My daughter, you have the love of your husband. Cherish that love. There's lots of things in this world that look good. But do these others really love you? You know he does. This is how the story is played. And it's archetypal because it's as dramatic as it can be. And that's how this story goes. And that's why this is an incredibly powerful chapter. And again, here's the crazy thing. If someone didn't say, well, let's study Ezekiel, this crazy book, we missed this amazing chapter. That's why it's part of the Bible. But again, if you're just reading along drowsily, you read this chapter, well, here's the thing. You read along drowsily, you get to this chapter, you wake up. And you say, what is this about? And then you say, the Bible shouldn't talk this way. But then when we begin to pull it apart, we begin to see, oh my, the whole Bible, in a sense, the whole story, the Christian story, is right here in this chapter. You'd never look at this chapter and say, well, here's a prophecy of Christ. But it is. Because the story of this chapter is the story of the cross. It's just not a king and a queen. Then you get to the book of Revelation, and again, the book of Revelation picks up this story. Because who is the church? It's the bride of Christ. What kind of bride is she? She's an unfaithful bride.
Yeah, like it.
Like this one. That's how, and people are like, well, I can't believe in the church. I say, yeah, she's an unfaithful bride. But she's also the bride. And she gets her glory from the king, who both does not give up on justice, understands justice, but holds still to promise. And this is Christ in the church, and it's Christ in us. Our unfaithfulness and his determination to have us be that queen who was restored. Now you say, oh, this language is so genderful. Yeah, but in this language, guess who's the queen? Me. I'm a queen. Doesn't mean I put on lipstick or makeup or a wig. It means in this drama, I am the female.
Yeah, they'll say clarify that you're on.
It's all on videotape. Let's pray. Chapter 17 next week. Lord, in this drama, we are unfaithful, and you are the husband who seeks us out. And Lord, the dynamic of this story should be that we recognize the roles that we have played and how we've been unfaithful in the covenant and how you seek us still. Help us, Lord, to live this out. And may we, Lord, as we swap roles, may we in other relationships be the king who holds faithful to covenants even when our partners are unfaithful. Because, Lord, we believe that in this drama, some truly spectacular things arise. And may we, Lord, see them by your grace. Hear our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.